New conservatives are not the same as the conservatives from 10 years ago. So you have to be very careful about that. The values have changed significantly in very surprising ways, more than I thought they could. And I think populists are in some ways anti-American. Like getting Nick Fuentes to just blatantly admit that he's not very American in terms of how, it's funny because your slogan is America first, and here you're admitting to wanting to turn America into a theocracy. You acknowledge that your point of view is fundamentally anti-American. From the founding fathers, the framers, the law. Why is populism bad? I'm not sure what it is. I thought it was okay in nature. Am I dumb? My end state dream would be nice to run a publication where I am proud of the articles that are being written because I feel like they accurately represent most sides of things. It feels like everybody is loaded against something. Who would you even have on the right? If there's a concept that I could imbue in your mind, whether you're liberal or conservative, okay? Do you think depressed people have a more accurate view of reality compared to normies? There are interesting studies on depressed people being more realistic with certain estimates. I would be surprised. I would have to see those studies. One thing that I argued with this with Devin a little bit, and I wish people could understand this. I think one thing that people, let's see if I can get this into words. People sometimes make a mistake when they're evaluating things, and they think of things in terms of, this concept is not solidified in my brain yet, because I started thinking about this I think a couple months ago. So I don't have a good handle on this. There'll be an effect right here. Oh, we were talking about rationality. I'm just going to spit some random words out, and this concept will be more solid in my brain probably in a couple months. But basically, people will do a thing and they'll question whether or not somebody's being rational in their behavior. They'll say, oh, is this person being rational or is this person being irrational? However, when they think of rational or irrational, what they think of is a process. But what they never consider is that people actually have different values for end states that they aren't aware of. People assume that everybody has the same end state subjective valuation going on, but that's not always the case. Because I think the example I used was homosexuality. And I think, was it Hutch? Or was it Devin that argued this relating to homosexuality? It was Rose Wrist is who I was talking this about. Rose Wrist, I think, was arguing, okay, well, if I was to debate whether we should accept gay people, I'm going to say that, well, if we accept gay people in society, it increases economic activity, it increases, less people are dying, it increases, how much people get along with each other. It might be all these things. And the assumption is that as long as we're following a rational thought process, we're all going to wind up at the same place. But the problem is that these particular end goals aren't valued the same by different people. It's not actually just the process. There's actually a different weighting to the values at the end. The only reason I bring that up is because when people say, do depressed people have a more realistic outlook on life than non-depressed people, is it really depends on what that outlook or those end things are. Because I think that depressed people might not be giving as much value or weight to some things that healthy, ordinary minds are. That would be an assumption I would make. An ordinary healthy mind might end up in a place where a depressed person, if they ended up there, would be really upset, but the ordinary mind is oh, well, this is fine, if that makes sense. That was a kind of a yap. When you argue that Biden is better than Trump with conservatives, are you appealing to conservative values? If not, aren't those debates pretty hard? Well, I think Biden is better than Trump if you appeal to conservative values, but you have to be careful with... The new conservatives are not the same as the conservatives from 10 years ago. So you have to be very careful about that. The values have changed significantly in very surprising ways, more than I thought they could. I'm not sure. I don't know how you would argue with a populist. I have nothing in common with a populist. And I think populists are in some ways anti-American. So it's an interesting, getting Nick Fuentes to say, I don't want to say getting him to say, because he's kind of secretly open about it, that just blatantly admit that he's not very American in terms of how, it's funny because your slogan is America first, and here you're admitting to wanting to turn America into a theocracy in a way that would appall any of the original Constitution drafters or founding fathers, whatever, right? That's wild to me, yeah. You acknowledge that your point of view is fundamentally anti-American. From the founding fathers, the framers, 100%. The law. I started watching your stuff, and indeed, it seems to make a great effort to stay informed. How do you stay up to date with news? How do you prioritize what types of news to read into? And do you prioritize any countries or regions that you keep up to date with? I will say, and I've been saying this more, and it's a little bit aggressive, and it sounds kind of mean, and I don't mean to make it sound that way, but I think that a big red flag is when somebody says, I read a variety of news sources to stay informed, and that's how I like counter my bias. That's a bullshit statement. If you want to stay informed on stuff, you just have to be willing to read. There's no shortcut for it. I think it's kind of like working out your brain. There's not like an easy thing you can do to just get muscles and get shredded. You just kind of have to do it. As long as you're willing to read and read a decent amount, you'll be pretty informed on stuff. There's this idea that there's some hardcore, like you got to try so hard to pick the right sources and the right news and all that is kind of bullshit. Like you've seen us on stream. We've read like a variety of news sources about a variety of events. They more or less report the same stuff. That's why when Andrew Tate was like, look at how different everybody reports something. No, not really. They generally report like about the same. There's going to be differences when it comes to countries reporting things relating to their country. So like when Turkey shot down those jets from Russia, it was because Russia, is saying that Turkey's just doing it for no reason, and they were going in to bomb ISIS, and Turkey was saying, well, actually, you guys are bombing the good guys, and you're over our territory, so fuck you, and the U.S. is kind of siding with Turkey. Like, for stuff like that, it might be a little bit different, but for the most part, the reports are generally the same. Hold on. Why is populism bad? I'm not sure what it is. I thought it was okay in nature. Am I dumb? In my mind, populism is basically it's a revolt against institutions because you're unhappy with the current state of affairs, but you don't have any real solutions for how to fix them. So you just rally behind like a strong leader who says he's going to fix everything, but doesn't give you any realistic paths forward. Destiny, if I want to stay informed, but I don't have the time to read, well, that's where a good media company would come in. I'm not sure. That's what this is. I think like my end state dream in 5 or 10 years, I don't know. My end state dream it would be nice to run a publication where I'm proud of the articles that are being written because I feel like they accurately represent most sides of things, but like an article can be read in 5 minutes. Like that like does a good job at trying to get a fair message across. That I don't know of any publications right now that exist like that. It feels like everybody is loaded against something. But yeah, I don't know. I also wouldn't trust any news site that calls itself nonpartisan or unbiased because those are usually the most biased and most partisan. So I don't know. Are you saying that somebody reads 20 articles a week from CNN or just informed as someone reading 20 articles a week at Fox? Not the same. I'm saying that either of those people will be more informed than the person who only reads Twitter headlines. Yes. Can't you have pro-institutional populism? I don't think so. I think populism and institutionalism are kind of opposed to each other. No? Is it necessarily? I feel like populism is the idea that like the public needs to rise up because like we're not being represented by the elites. And I feel like the institutions are more often the representation of the elite than like the public is like the feeling. Where would you say you are biased? Well, my biases are going to be related to things that are personal to me. If I have biases, they're going to be things that are personal to me, which can be good or can be bad. But the biggest advantage I have is that I don't have any political or social allegiance because I can be alone all the time and I don't give a I don't care if I have friends or not in any particular group. So I'm isolated from that. And then I have I'm not like politically allegiant to a particular thing. If like Biden comes out as a hardcore protectionist or some bullshit, or like Bernie Sanders would win against Nikki Haley, I might like support conservatives more maybe. I don't have like any big political allegiances. There are pros and cons to it, but at this point in my career, I'm big enough that most of the cons have kind of subsided, although there's still big things to deal with. But I can still have personal biases, right? So maybe I'm more inclined to believe a certain thing because of a personal experience I have. Maybe I'm more inclined to fight against a certain thing because certain people represent that I don't like personally. So those are things that I would have to be aware of. But I don't have like all the same social cohesive problems that other people do because I don't give a Isn't SXE Phil already covering the news in short form with a kind of middle ground take? Who is SXE Phil? I don't know who that is. Don't you mention the CHIPS Act in support of Biden and infrastructure bill? Aren't those hardcore protectionists? I think you can probably make decent... SXE Phil is Philip DeFranco? What does SXE mean? I think you can probably make decent national security arguments in relation to the manufacturing of certain things. Sexy Phil? Was that his first name or?
Sup, you beautiful bastards!
Okay. I haven't watched a lot of Straight Edge. Oh shit, I remember that Straight Edge. I remember just from the Philip DeFranco I've seen. Okay, so Philip DeFranco does a decent job at being nonpartisan. It seems like he gives both sides of the story, but it would also be nice to give an opinion too. Like, ideally, this is the ideal. Okay, well, if you're just doing reporting, it would be reporting. Ideally, is I want somebody I want a news website where an opinion is given, but all sides have been fairly considered. That would be my ideal, right? So, for instance, let's say that we were writing stories about, let's say that we were going to write a story about the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, right? There would be 4 different ways that I see this covered. A left-leaning source might say, oh, well, in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, Israelis have constantly been backstabbing Palestinians. They have never stopped encroaching on Palestinian land, and they've always negotiated from huge positions of power while cutting out Palestinian delegates to negotiate peace. Okay, that might be like a really left-leaning take on it. A really right-leaning take on it might be, Palestinians have always been bad partners for peace. The origination of the Palestinian movement has been one of violence. That's never changed, and all of their leaders have spoken constantly about overthrowing all of Israel, and the international support seems to say as much. Like, oh, okay, well, that's a right-leaning take. Then you might be able to get like a Philip DeFranco take, where Philip DeFranco would say, oh, for Israel-Palestine, both sides have had issues with trying to be partners for peace. The left or the Palestinians seem to constantly be using terrorism and other forms of militant violence to encourage change. And the Israelis on the right seem to always respond with that militant violence by doing their own things, like, massive territorial expansion of the West Bank, right? I feel like the best news source would be one that would give like a take that would be similar to this, but then like offer a recommendation that goes in like one direction while still considering all of that. Does that make sense? So like the ultimate thing would be repeating the Philip DeFranco take, and then from there, like make a suggestion based on what would probably be for the best. I think like I feel like this would be the best evolution of this. So like this is trash. The left side is trash. The right side is trash. Philip DeFranco, it might be decent at like giving you a factual take on something, but I don't feel like I see Philip DeFranco giving opinions much. Am I wrong on that? I feel like Philip DeFranco is one where he's like, this is what's going on, here's that, and this could happen, and here's that. What do you guys think? Tell me in the comments. I feel like, I'm not saying that's good or bad, but there seems to be he seems to be less opinionated on things that I've watched. That's my impression. I could be wrong, but. Would you still have a problem with populism in countries where the elites are actually super corrupt / authoritarian? Not necessarily. Could you argue that the American Revolution was kind of populist? Maybe. Would you say that? I don't know if you would. I don't know. Different styles of revolutions or governments might be preferable in different areas. So, for instance, if you were to tell me, like, Destiny, how do you feel about secular dictatorships? Well, as an American, I would say, I really don't want a secular dictatorship. That sounds horrible. But if I lived in like a theocratic dictatorship, I might say a secular dictatorship sounds way better than what we have right now, right? It just kind of depends, right? Philip DeFranco doesn't give his opinion when it's super controversial. He only gives it on stuff he knows his whole audience agrees on. Okay. Don't populists want to change the current institutions, not abolish them? I don't know. 90 seconds behind, but what about issues where it seems one-sided? How would you want, say, Trump immunity covered or Trump 2020 election lies? I think on one-sided stuff, I don't think you can't pull punches. You just have to be honest, I think. Yeah, you should never sacrifice honesty, I don't think. If you were to create this and have that table of 4 people like in the news, who would you want there? People from across the political spectrum? Oh God, I don't know. I don't want to be a simp, but I feel like if I was like buying slaves to force them to work on my news platform right now, I think maybe the only person I know that works on YouTube that I don't think I've ever heard them give a take where I'm like, oh, like I kind of agree with you, but you're so partisan. Oof. Is probably Josiah, I think. Because I think we've disagreed on some things. Josiah doesn't feel partisan. I mean, he does the Democrat reporting side, but I've never heard him say things that are like, oof. I think Econo Boy is pretty good. Loner Box seems to be pretty good. I'm not even thinking pretty good in terms of like quality. I'm just thinking in terms of like checking like biases. Pisco can get kind of crazy sometimes, but I think I bring that out in him. But I would say like maybe those guys, yeah. Below all appeals to be the center is a goal to have something fact-based. Getting people that engage with primary sources matters more than anything else. A little bit, yeah. Or not necessarily primary sources, because a news would be like tertiary sources, right? Or I don't want to make things center. I just want things to like consider all the different sides of things. It doesn't have to be center. It can be like, this is the right answer. Like the right answer is way over here, to the right or to the left. Who would you even have on the right? I don't know. I don't know right now. I don't know if I can think of any like intelligent. Well, I can think of intelligent right-leaning commentary people. I just can't think of any that haven't been super audience captured. Like Ben Shapiro is a smart guy. I have a lot of respect for him in a lot of different ways. But my God, the selling out to Trump is so fucking sad to me. What about Connor? I love Connor. He's a great guy, but I feel like he gets a little bit too much in some direction sometimes. But people also might feel that way about me. How do you rationally square away advocating for liberalism, but also supporting a government founded on fundamental ethno-nationalists, institutions, and principles like Israel? I think that how a country runs is fundamentally separate from its immigration policy. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with protecting the character of your nation. So for instance, I didn't know this until we did the immigration research. In the United States, for our total breakout of immigrants, we don't accept more than 7% of our total immigrants from a certain country per year. Like if all the immigrants coming in, it'll never be like, oh, well, this year 90% of the immigrants were Indian, 90% were Mexican, 90% were whatever. I think that protecting a certain type of character, you might call this national ethnic if you want, but protecting a certain character for your country, I think is an okay thing to do via immigration policy, assuming that you treat everybody in the country the same, which I think Israel more or less does, except for the occupied territories, which is complicated. But I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. So like if people wanted to immigrate to the United States and their position was like, we need to violently overthrow the country, we need to violently destroy whatever because of bullshit, then like I'd be like, it's probably okay to not have these people go to the country. I think that's okay. But it's a bit more than character. No, it's specifically for Jews to have a nation state. Sure, but well, that's kind of their ethnic character, right? Or that's the character that they're kind of defending. Do you think America was founded on ethnocentrism? Well, it depends on how you define ethnicity, because that's an incredibly contentious thing. But I think that there are certain ideas that are core to America that I think are worth considering when you bring people into the country. So things related to like liberalism, or things related to democracy, or things related to like rule of law. I think it's okay to look for some amount of cohesion there. Watch this for 5 minutes.
We're here at GW University in Washington, D.C., and there's some encampments that are protesting against Israel. They were taught that
I had a politics professor in college claim it was impossible to test for ideology. That might be true. Remember what I was saying with Rose Wrist, and I think with Devin, in that like people will say a lot of the same things, but at the end of the day, the application of those things is far, 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 far different. So like the alignment doesn't even really matter ideologically on some things. A really good example of this is it's a joke video, but it illustrates the point, right? It's like this video. It's a joke, but it's like it works to illustrate the idea. That like you can have these positions where they're kind of like the same, but like would you call it the normative positions? I think you'd say normative. I don't even know if like meta-normative applied would be here, but like you're kind of like your generator seems to be the same, but for some reason the output is vastly different, right?
Brad first met, I didn't think we'd get along, but turns out we kind of agree on everything. Your racial identity is the most important thing. Everything should be looked at through the lens of race.
Jinx, you owe me a Coke. We both have a lot of opinions about people of color, even though we barely know any.
I say colored people, but as long as we're classifying them, we both think minorities are a united group who think the same and act the same.
And vote the same. You don't want to lose your black card. Sorry, I don't know. I just think we should
roll back discrimination laws so we can hire based on race again. Jinx, now you owe me a Coke. Hey, tell them what you told me yesterday.
White actors should only do voices for white cartoon characters.
I've been saying that for years. Stick to your own.
Us white people, we have so much privilege.
I agree. It is a privilege to be white. Ask him about interracial dating.
All I said is that black men who date white women have internalized racism, and white men that date ethnic women are fetishizing them.
Guys against interracial dating now. Like, am I being pranked? Did Boomer put you up to this?
Ugh, you know that taco place is white owned?
White people should be making white foods like Kraft macaroni and cheese, no seasoning, not even salt. It's like he's a mind reader. I mean, I've been pushing for segregation forever, and my man does what?
I created an improv comedy show exclusively for ethnic people.
Guy segregates comedy on my birthday.
White people need to stop wearing dreadlocks, and they need to stop appropriating black people's music.
Shaved heads and country music, the way God intended.
You know all white people are racist.
I'm listening.
Even if you have a black wife or a black friend group, you're still really racist.
You know, we just kicked a guy out of the organization for having a black girlfriend, but if you can promise me he's still really racist, we'll consider letting him back in. Black people should only shop at black businesses.
I guess the only thing we really disagree about is I think white people are the root of all evil.
But what did I tell you, though? If we can narrow that down to a certain group of tiny-hatted white people, I think we can come to an understanding.
Oh shit, we got there. Oh, so the last like 20 seconds of this video isn't relevant anymore because now we have gotten there.
though, if we can narrow that down to a certain group of tiny-hatted white people, I think we can come to an understanding.
Technically, I don't consider Jewish people white.
Neither do I.
But yeah, you can have people that are essentially saying a lot of the same things, but then when you look at the application, yeah. But the issue is that, remember, I think the issue is that most people are, you inherit your beliefs from a certain bubble of people that you're in, and then you kind of backwards reason your way to the conclusion because the aesthetic of truth and rationality is attractive. So you want to do that backwards rationalization, pretend you've done it, but it doesn't really in practice end up working, right? Yeah. Well, I mean, it works well enough. Was cutting Nick Fuentes off worth it, given that he's back in the fold now? Yeah, apparently it was super worth it. I almost didn't stream that night, and people were like begging me to go on, and I was like, but apparently it was worth it. I made like 20 people look like dipshits, which was far easier than I thought it would be. Oh, and Nick got so mad, honestly. He got so mad. Was there any post-debate communication with George Santos? No, but I also don't know how much I would even want to... I'm not sure. His fans constantly spam clips with the title Destiny Obsessed with Nick, but it's literally the compilation of Nick talking about... One thing I thought was really funny, I almost retweeted this, but I think it was from a Graper. There was a Graper that posted a clip to show that like Nick owned me, and I actually watched the full clip, and I was like, they included way too much of this, because I felt like I sounded really good in this clip. And I think most people in the comments were agreeing. I was really surprised that they kept as much in as they did. We'd be doing regular spaces going forward. Yeah, we'll see how my chat with X goes. I also think Nick is getting rusty. I feel like he hasn't been opposed in a long time. I feel like he admitted way too much to me in that conversation. He should have never admitted to being anti-American. That was a wild admission. I also don't think he should. I think if I was like doing like political strategy or communication strategy for Nick, I don't think I would say anything about like Muslims or Jews not being able to hold office. I think I would just say something along the lines of like, these people should have to take an additional pledge to the United States or something. I think I would phrase that a lot differently. That's a wild admission. I also wouldn't admit to wanting to form a theocratic government either, but maybe I'm just way too out of step with where he wants to be. Like he's angling himself to be so much more extreme than he needs to be. Why would you do Christian theocracy? Why not just like Christian country? Because you can make an argument that there's like a Christian character to the United States. I would argue heavily against that being enshrined in law anywhere. But him wanting to do the full theocratic route is just so much more extreme than it needs to be. But I don't know. He's just not. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think he's been opposed for a long time. So, what is the solution to anti-liberal people? It feels extreme violence is the only answer. I think you have to keep championing liberalism. I've been trying to do that more in recent conversations. I did that a lot with the Soliman. Is that his name? The Muslim guy did. Like I'm trying to build up the U.S. a lot more. Like talking about like, hey, this is like cool shit. Why are gruppers massive pussies? I debate a few and they run away after like 3 messages. I think the issue is when you're talking about like totalitarian stuff, authoritarian stuff, illiberal stuff, it's very fragile. It doesn't resist outside pressure much, so you have to engage in a whole bunch of like crazy tactics to keep it working. That's why Nazis want to kill all people, all the intelligentsia, everybody that's opposed to them. That's why leftists want to lock everybody in gulags, all the intelligentsia and the people of the different ideologies or whatever. I think liberalism is strong enough that it can host a lot of its own criticism and then incorporate that criticism into itself moving forward. I think that's a pretty unique thing. I think it's one of the reasons why liberalism is like the dominating world culture at the moment, is because it's so the opposite of fragile. It's so tenacious and can host a lot of its own criticism and then incorporate that moving forward. It's not just, it's like adaptable and tenacious, I think. There's like a better word that combines both of those. Robust is a good one too, yeah. Destiny, what would you rather live under, fascism or communism? You have to choose one. Well, am I part of the ruling class in either one? I don't know. Communism seems more stable than fascism. I don't know if fascism demands as much invasion as communism does. I mean, the Soviet Union engaged in a whole bunch of fucking external activity. So I'm not even sure. I don't even know if that's true, actually. I don't know if we've seen enough of either of those ideologies to even say. They both kind of feel like failed ideologies to me. Because like, what if the Nazis were communist and the Soviet Union were Nazis, but we still supported the Soviet Union, then the Nazis probably would have won, right? So yeah, I don't even know. At Destiny, how can you possibly say that the middle class is not feeling the effects of inflation as evident by CPI increase of 20%? It is clear that you are not knowledgeable about this or just bad faith. He's doing a lot of caps. Since the research you are doing is biased from a left-wing perspective. Listen, I'll say the same thing that I think every economist has been saying, the same thing I've been saying since the start of this. If all of the indexes are as inflated as they are, if inflation is as bad as it is, then like at the very end, we should be able to see, like, show me the outcomes, right? there's a thing that happens when you do econ research, or any research really. You're looking at like all of these little contributing factors, all these little causal things, and at the end of the day, you hope that this like basically comes out in a measurable and easy to observe way. So for instance, let's say that we say that like, if you eat less processed food, that's better for you. If you do 60 minutes of walking a day, that's better for you. If you get 8 hours of sleep, that's better for you. Let's say that we study all three of these things for people that do them, and then we look at the end result, and then we find out, all these people die younger. Wait, what? That doesn't make sense. Something is missing here. Why would all these people that do all these things that we think are good, why are they dying younger? I think that's like the issue that people are running into is people are complaining about a bunch of things, but when they're starting to look at these like end economic conditions, they're just not seeing any of it come out anywhere. A really common one was houses. People are saying, well, cost of housing is increasing. Younger people are moving out at like later dates. People are putting off buying their first home for a long time. But then when you look at the numbers at the end, Gen Z is on track. They have the same homeownership rate that Gen X and millennials did. No, higher than millennials. Gen X and boomers did at the same age. So wait, what's going on there? Something is happening that's not coming out in the data. And so it's hard to understand like what is actually going on here. Vaccine question here. If I'm a healthy male who got COVID and it had no effects on me, is it even sensible for me to get a vaccine? To my understanding, a vaccine does not prevent getting or spread COVID. It just helps body fight symptoms of COVID. Okay, I think technically when you're talking about diseases, for some diseases, we have a name for the disease and then we have a name for the virus or the bacteria. Sometimes we differentiate these things. A common example of this would be COVID, right? COVID is the name of the disease where you get like, you get a disease and the disease, hold on, let me be way more clear here. COVID is the name of the disease that you get when you've been infected with the virus SARS-CoV-2, right? I knew all this at one point in time. Hold on, we're writing this down. SARS stands for severe, meaning it is a big one. Acute, meaning I think acts quick, lasts shortly. Respiratory, meaning it affects your respiratory system. Severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS. And then COVID means that it's a coronavirus. And then 2, I think it's because there was a second one observed in this class of bullshit, right? So this is the virus. I believe that there might be a more sophisticated name for the virus now, but at least when it came out, this is the virus that you get infected with. Just because you get infected with the virus doesn't necessarily mean you develop the disease. So a really common example of this is HIV. Theoretically, you can contract HIV and never actually develop AIDS, right? HIV is the human immunovirus. What does HIV stand for? Let's look it up. Just need to look them up so I know. Human immunodeficiency virus. So you can get the virus, okay? But HIV is not the condition that is AIDS, which is acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, right? What a vaccine is supposed to prevent you from doing, what all vaccines prevent you from doing is, what a vaccine does is a vaccine makes it so that if you get infected with the virus, your immune system has a blueprint of the virus and can recognize it and basically kill it before you actually develop severe symptoms relating to the disease that the virus causes. This is true for, my understanding is that this is true for every single vaccine ever. Smallpox, polio, like none of these vaccines prevent you from acquiring the virus. None of these vaccines prevent you from spreading the virus. But if you get it, your body recognizes it and kills it basically before it actually causes a disease in your body. That's what vaccines are designed to do. Now, if you don't get the disease, then theoretically your infection rate, not your infection rate, what am I thinking of? Your shedding rate for the virus, because the time at which you spend in severe illness and then like coughing and transmitting should be lower. So theoretically, it should reduce the amount of transmission, although you can still shed and transmit a virus, even if you're not aware of it. If you're not like super sick, it's still possible. But that's supposed to be how it like decreases the amount of disease spread and everything. Yeah. Jesus. I think the problem isn't that the vaccine will be better than not getting it across the board. It's that a lot of people didn't want it, were pressured into it, and then some got certain vaccine-related lethal diseases that they were told were impossible. Nobody should have said anything was impossible. The idea is supposed to be that the vaccine statistically is better for you than the disease, which is going to be true of basically all vaccines. The problem is that when people compare vaccines to the other alternative, people will compare vaccines to just not getting vaccinated. For every single possible thing you can possibly get vaccinated for, it is always better to not have a vaccine than it is to have a vaccine. You should never, ever, 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 in a vacuum, want a vaccine instead of not getting a vaccine, because every vaccine has the potential for side effects. There's no reason to get a vaccine over not getting it in a vacuum. But what you're comparing it to isn't getting it versus not getting it. You're comparing getting the vaccine to the likelihood of getting the disease. That's what the comparison is supposed to be, but nobody seems to understand that. So when you talk about a vaccine for the virus SARS-CoV-2, okay, to prevent the development of the disease COVID-19, you shouldn't be comparing the vaccine to no vaccine. You should be comparing the vaccine to the risk-adjusted side effects of getting COVID, right? So like your likelihood of getting infected with SARS-CoV-2 and developing COVID is like pretty high, like 90+%. Like almost everybody's like gotten it at this point, right? So what you're comparing is, okay, well, what are the side effects of the vaccine and what are the side effects of being infected with SARS-CoV-2 and developing disease? And then you compare those two. And in that case, I think it's very, very easy to say that the vaccine is vastly better. It's almost always going to be better to have a vaccine response in your body than an actual having to fight the disease response to your body. Can you explain why people are afraid of the mRNA technology? Is it just because it's new tech? It's just because it's new and RNA is scary and people don't understand the underlying mechanisms of how any vaccines or anything work anyway. So it just seems scary. Like the reality is like you can very easily, in a world where mRNA vaccines were common, attenuated viral vaccines would be incredibly scary. Like I can write the movie. I can already write the script that every right winger would be using, right? We've been doing vaccines for a long time. All they do is they inject harmless mRNA into your body. It doesn't even go into the nucleus of the cell. Your ribosomes process it, and you've got an immune response. mRNA vaccines should be the standard. Now they're creating these new vaccines where they take actual viruses and they deactivate them by genetically modifying them. These viruses go into your nucleus and infect your actual DNA before they blah, blah. Like it would be the exact same talking about just on the other side, right? If you look at it from like a raw, like just what's happening standpoint, technically, I would say an attenuated vaccine or with an attenuated virus, the adenovirus or whatever vaccines, those are like they sound 20 times more scary than like an mRNA vaccine. But it's just because the mRNA one came later and because of all the other like high bullshit going on in society that people are like more afraid of the mRNA shit. But it's kind of dumb. Do you really think we should be essentially mandating vaccines when we don't entirely know the possible risks, even if people don't want it? The problem is that I beg you, it's a waste of time. I'm wasting my time, but it's okay. I'll keep saying it and maybe a few people, okay? You are comparing because the assumption you're starting with is that we knew at the very beginning that SARS-CoV-2 was no big deal, and then we're comparing that to a vaccine that we've dramatically overhyped the risk of. The problem is that at the beginning of the pandemic, nobody had any idea what that virus would look like in its final form. No one had any idea. You can pretend you do. You're lying. You don't even know what the current virus looks like or what the current vaccines look like, right? Nobody had any idea. It was the fastest spreading disease that probably killed since, I don't even know, since what? Like, how many millions of people died? It spread like insanity. This was, I think in the later variants, we had an R0 of fucking like 16 plus. For all the people saying things that like, oh, the lockdowns did nothing and blah, blah, blah. Like, we were getting SARS-CoV-2 infections at times where we were completely eliminating entire strains of the flu because we were locked down and everything so hard. As much as people say it didn't do anything, it just didn't happen to do much against this virus because it was so infectious. So when you're thinking about like vaccines and you're thinking about diseases, it's a race between one or the other. You don't get to live in a vacuum, okay? What? If there's like a concept that I could imbue in your mind, whether you're liberal or conservative, okay? Life is in motion. Life is always in motion. An indecision is a decision. You cannot not make a decision. Things are always moving forward. Indecision is often the worst decision. Sometimes it's worse than a bad decision. Life is always in motion. All of life is a struggle, okay, against entropy and utter like chemical collapse, okay? Your body is insulating you from an environment and you're fighting desperately on the inside to maintain homeostasis as your cells have membranes to fight against the outside world trying to collapse them, as your nucleus are like tightly protecting your DNA that is like fighting against the outside. Like every possible thing in life is a fight against utter annihilation, okay? We've got systems to prevent this, and time is moving forward in one direction, and when a problem comes up, you have to take courses where you're comparing, well, what are we gonna do versus what could happen? It's not just like, well, let's just sit and do nothing and see what happens. That's The universe isn't going to wait for you, okay? So when we go back and we think about like the vaccine period, or we think about like trying to beat a particular disease, it's not like, okay, well, let's just do nothing and we'll just see like how things turn out. It's, well, things are happening, and if this thing ends up being a little bit worse than we think, or not as bad or whatever, things can get really bad really fast. That's the issue. I understand your point, Stephen. I get it. I'm just saying, still, should it be a consensual decision? Some things, no. Here's the thing, okay? No. All of us agree on vaccines. Here's another thing that's very, very, very frustrating. Every single American, if I had to guess, I would say that 99.9% of Americans have a 100% agreement on vaccine mandates and on vaccine consensuality. The only things we really disagree about are the facts of the diseases and the facts of the vaccines. Because even if I went to the most extreme conservatives ever, and I said, hey, there's a new disease that has an R naught of 10. Every time you get infected, 10 more people get infected. It hides in your body for about 2 weeks, and then it comes out and it kills you with a 99% fatality rate. Do you think that we should mandate vaccines for this? I think even conservatives would say, yeah, obviously. Everybody should get a vaccine. That should be mandated. And then on the flip side, we say, hey, there's a new cold that's spreading. When you get it, you sneeze like 17 times and you've got some boogers, okay? Nick will show up and eat them if you want. And then you ask liberals, should we mandate a vaccine in society? Because I think most of them say, well, probably not. It's not a big deal, right? So I think like conceptually, ethically, I think we all agree with the concept of mandating certain public health things. We just don't, we just disagree on the facts of the particular vaccines or the facts of the particular diseases. Then why don't you think we should still be mandated to get vaccinated and boosted if the illness is ongoing and it's a greater good? Because at this point, the current mutations of the disease that are out don't seem to be causing hospitalization rates that are worrying for our medical system. That seems to be the case right now. Do you think that the COVID vaccine should have been mandated in the beginning of the pandemic? Yeah, of course. That all the data, all the evidence, everything pointed, and it seems to be true, that the side effects and everything were incredibly low to non-existent. And actually, listen, if you're super conspiratorial on this side, shouldn't you want to do it? Because weren't the Jews like literally the first people that mass did this? So like if it's safe, don't you want to do all the shit that the ruling class of like elite sectarian fucking Jewish rulers are doing? Like if they all did the COVID mRNA vaccines in Israel, should we be doing it? Like don't we want to copy their shit so we can rule the world too? Like, well, you concede that it came from a lab. We have no idea where it came from. My understanding is that right now, two of the largest scientific two of the largest scientific research papers that I think are a few years old at this point to it coming from the wet market. I think that our intelligence agencies are like split on where it came from. They might have data that the researchers didn't have. It could have come from a lab. I don't know. I'm like 60-40 that I think it came from the web market, but there's like a decent chance that it came from the lab, but we just don't know. I don't know. Unfortunately, we'll probably never know the answer to that question because it's China's labs. We don't have the access there. I'm not saying you're wrong, but do we know that's true, that the current iterations of COVID are far less impactful and no chance at the start we just panicked and made mistakes like ventilators? Hold on. Okay. So number one, I'm pretty sure we know that the current isn't that bad because we can look at the hospitalization rates versus the infected rates. Number one. Number two, ventilators were not a mistake. I don't know where you're getting that from. I do know where you're getting that from. You're probably getting that from the idea that when people are put on ventilators, their chances of dying increases a lot. That's the same thing as though like people who have people who get chemotherapy are far more likely to die from cancer. Once you're on a ventilator, that's because your condition has decreased, has worsened so much that you are no longer maintaining good oxygenated levels of blood. You have to be on a ventilator because you can't breathe. When you've hit that point, yeah, you're going to be put on a ventilator, but your chances of success are pretty low. I think we looked this up before and it said ventilator survival rates were like 80%. I thought they were low. I thought at the beginning of the pandemic for the first mutation, once you're on a ventilator, I thought you had like a 50-50 chance of making it. But it's not because the ventilators were killing people. It's because by the time you're on a ventilator, you're f***ed. Was COVID even that bad? Like, can bird and swine flu even be that bad? It's not like something called the Black Death Plague came from rats. The problem with COVID was that it was decently bad, but that it was so infectious. Remember, there are like different reasons why we can call different diseases bad. So like Ebola, for instance. Ebola, I don't think, if I understand the viropathology? What do you call the progression of a disease? Like, I don't think Ebola will ever be a big deal for the West. I don't think, even though it's incredibly infectious, because the onset of the symptoms and the severity of the disease make it such that you're never going to have a ton of people walking around giving people Ebola. I don't think it's going to happen because your eyes start bleeding. You like die, right? Whereas I think in like poorer countries, Ebola will often come from mistreatment of corpses. I think you can get Ebola from corpses. Am I making this up? Like you have like large bodies, or you've got like large graves, you're tossing bodies and then people get sick that way and shit. But it's probably never going to happen in the West. I don't think you'd ever see a mass spreading of Ebola in the West just because of the onset of symptoms and everything. But for COVID, because of how those symptoms worked, and it starts slightly and then it's a respiratory thing and you cough and blah, 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 the transmission of that disease is way, 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 way higher. That's one factor in terms of how you evaluate like what is the worst disease ever, you know, or what is like the threat that a disease could pose to public health. I personally conjecture that a lot of the hospitalization that started COVID is due to mass panic and fear of the unknown. Not that the first iteration was actually that bad and required mandated vaccine. I mean, can't we just look at death rates? Death rate or COVID-19 world. What were the I mean, it seems to be the case that like I'm pretty sure the current strains are more infectious, that they infect more people. Well, I mean, it seems to be the case that it is nowhere near as deadly as it was before. I mean, think about like it's a little bit of a bullshit comparison for several reasons, but I'll make it anyway, right? People are freaking out because of 30,000 dead Palestinians, right? But here you're losing well over 10,000 people a day for like months and months and months here. Like, why do the pharmaceutical companies push the release of data that they used to roll out vaccines for so long? I'm not 100% sure. Every time, there's always like a new like thing that's like, oh, they did hit this or blah, blah, blah. But like every time I look into it, there's like a reason for it. But I don't know 100%, yeah. In the same vein of your truth versus aesthetic of truth combo with Devin the other day, how do you frame the aesthetics of a logically justified vaccine mandate against bodily autonomy? Super easily, because it's bodily autonomy versus bodily autonomy, right? Vaccine mandates are not an issue of one person's bodily autonomy. It's the protection of everybody's autonomy. If we're swimming in a pool together and the rule is don't piss in the pool, it's not about violating your right to pee in the pool if you want to. It's about protecting me from your urine while I'm in the pool. And it's the same thing with public health stuff related to vaccines too. That there are certain communicable diseases that can represent a huge threat to society, and you can infect people from that, then that's false destiny. What's false? Brennan Rateni. Considering the breakthroughs we made for the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, do you know if we will get future flu vaccines faster as a result? Maybe, but the issue with flu vaccines isn't really that. I don't think the issue is the speed of producing them. It's trying to predict which strains will become mainstream, because I think that the influenza virus, I think, mutates in ways that makes it hard for your immune system to identify, like, very frequently. Did you accept that the cookie ban was likely punitive? They didn't blockade sugar, so that defeats your argument that the cookies were used for sugar rockets. My argument, first of all, the original argument that I made was never that cookies were used for sugar rockets. My original argument was that people would never engage with the reason why a blockade exists. That's the original argument, that nobody, whether or not they did or even didn't ban cookies, isn't even technically relevant. The whole point was, will you even engage with why a blockade exists? If you can't even get to that level. Now, in terms of did they actually ban cookies, I actually, at this point, I have no idea. I saw Lonerbox did a thread on it. I had several people email me, and I did a lot of digging, and I got everywhere from there was no blockade of any of these goods and services ever, to some things were blocked because they came from certain countries or had other things detected, to they were punitively blocking some things for a period of time, but then they stopped, to so I might actually do like a in-depth reading at some point. I should, about the blockade, especially because it comes up so much better. At this point, I actually have no idea like where the fuck the like what the actual status was on any of that. Where's the one guy at? Did he say anything in YouTube chat? That's false. That's false. Okay. He already answered you. Putting Palestinians on a diet is worse. It amounts to collective punishment. So here's another thing, and I'm curious. I look for that quote a lot. I have never seen that quote in practice. Is that a real quote? Because I tried to find the source for that, and I just see that like it was reported that a guy said it. I don't remember the guy's name, but I think he denies saying it, and I've never actually seen the bodily autonomy argument. I think there's a case that the mandates in the beginning were an overstep. That wasn't a response to what I said. Also, vaccines are already like quasi-mandated in the US to go to public schools. I looked at some human rights org articles from the time, and they describe it as economic warfare. Would that be a fair characterization? And if so, justified? Is it a fair characterization? I don't think so. And would it be justified? Never. I don't think you're supposed to engage in economic warfare because it counts as collective punishment. Although I will say, I got an interesting email from my Hasbro contact. It was by a Jewish dude. And he posed a very interesting question. And I don't actually know the answer to this because I think his question was, everybody's claiming that if Israel blockaded economic things to Palestinians, that it would amount to collective punishment. And that's a war crime and not fair. Well, why is the United States allowed to lead worldwide sanctions on places like Iraq or Iran or Russia? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't know what is the difference. Why does a sanction not amount to collective punishment? I'm not actually sure. I don't know the answer to that at all. Divine quasi. I say that vaccines are quasi-mandated because in order to be enrolled in any public school, you have to have a certain vaccine intake. However, you could theoretically homeschool your kids and avoid those. That's why I say quasi-mandated. You could theoretically you could get around it. Destiny, because there's international consensus and it only affects assets you're giving them. Is there international consensus? I thought one of the big claims that Saddam Hussein made or other people in the Middle East made was that 1 million people died in Iraq because of the sanctions. It isn't meant to be a collective punishment, but it ends up having the same effect. I'm in Syria and it feels like it. Damn, Youssef. From the reading I've done, all variants of COVID had a lethality of well under 0.1% in young people. Well, why are you specifying young people? Old people get infected too. All variants of COVID had lethality of well under 0.1% in young people, not changing much for any. Only a late Delta strain had slightly higher. Like, who cares? What do you mean? Like, older people are always going to be more at risk for disease. Well, I think wasn't there like one strain of flu? There was one strain of something, but generally diseases always affect. Is it neonatal or like, I think like super newborns and older people. Like if you're dying from a disease between like 5 and like 50, like something is very fucking crazy with that particular disease. I think generally diseases don't kill young people like that. That was untrue. The numbers published by the Iraqi Health Ministry at Destiny, Lancet had a big controversy over publishing this. No, I'm aware that there's a huge fight over that. There's like 500,000 Iraqi dead children too. There's huge fights over those numbers, and I don't think they're true. But I'm just saying that was a talking point at the time, that the sanctions and everything are murdering people in these countries, and the sanctions are even worse than war. I've heard that like 20 years ago and after, like people would give that argument relating to things we do in the Middle East. I don't think old people should be the priority when cost balancing the impact on the economy in terms of work. But old people are some of the largest consumers of resources in our society, and especially when it comes to healthcare. Why would we not factor in old people? And old people are getting older and older too, right? Because our lifespans are kind of not our lifespans, our life expectancy is kind of increasing as well, right? Do you think you should ask for more time in sort of 2v1 debates like BP debate? No, I realized what I should do. I actually thought about this recently. I just need to ask for more time. Please let me finish. I think when you say that, when you're polite to people, it is impossible for them to be rude to you. And it looks horrible. I just need to get in the habit of saying that. Can I please finish this point? I need to get in the habit of saying that. Would tariffs on trade amount to collective punishment? No. Sanctions are different than tariffs, I believe. A tariff is basically saying like, hey, if you want to import this, you can, but we're going to tax it more on our side, usually to make that thing less competitive from that country, ideally to make it more competitive in your country. Sometimes makes other countries more competitive, an unfortunate side effect. But a sanction is, I believe a sanction is you're not allowed to import, or everybody that agrees with us isn't even going to export you certain goods or services, I think is the difference. A sanction is like a total ban. A tariff is just a tax, I believe. Destiny and getting snappy if they refuse. Hit them with the "I let you finish, please." Maybe yeah. People don't have a really good, I'm not faulting people for this. People don't have a very good concept of how long they've spoken in a debate. People really do think that they're not speaking as much as they are. And like even me, like I've had to work a lot at developing that intuitive concept because I can come away thinking like, I feel like I haven't spoken out, but I'll think like, okay, well, let's like really think. And I'm usually pretty on the mark, I think, when I make predictions. Like, I bet this guy's spoken more than me. And then when they go to measure it out, like it's about as much as I say. But if you don't think about it at all, then yeah, it's very easy to come away thinking like, I feel like I haven't spoken that much at all. This is bullshit. And then you look at the time, it's like, oh shit, I spoke, 1.3 times as much as him. Yeah. Who ultimately pays the tariff on an imported good? It's the consumer, yeah. which is why economists usually fucking hate tariffs. But I mean, economists are cucks who only want more and more economic activity, so fuck them. I think a lot of people forget about the comorbidities that COVID exacerbated, making it less the problem and more of an accelerant. Happened in Italy from smokers. Yeah, a little bit, sure. Is your view still that countries need to not be vague about their posturing? Nukes, military, and such? I mean, I think my view is just that I wish we were honest about our foreign policy objectives. It would make it easier to sell to the American public, and it would make it easier for people to get behind what we do. And generally, I think they're good. We just, for some reason, we aren't confident in them, or at least leaders aren't. I don't know. Unironically, you should bowl Finkelstein and speak obnoxiously slow. Oh, God. Don't you usually get cut off more, though? Maybe, but I just need to do that. Please let me speak. You speak so fast, you say more, but time-wise, most of the time less. Sure. I can slow down, but I get cut off so much. If I were to try to do a conversation where I was speaking at this speed, I want you to understand that I'm going to make arguments A, B, and C, and it's going to lead to this conclusion, and I need you to maybe I could. I don't know. Oh, God. If I get cut off, though, I'm going to get triggered. Hold on, let me finish my point. I need to make the... Yeah. You got to hit him with the leper king hand? Oh, damn. I've never seen anybody besides Finkelstein do that, so I don't think I can add that to the debate pervertry for strategies. But the leper king hand. That's a good one. The leper king hand. Here's a weird one. Do you not think your stance to mandated vaccines and lockdown applies just generally to a flu winter with your same argument and lethality to the elderly? The flu has just never been as contagious or as lethal. Generally. Like, I think our worst flu seasons are usually 60,000 deaths. What was our worst year for COVID deaths? Is there a way to break this down by, like, year or... Let's see. How many people, USA, died COVID 2021? COVID-19 was associated with approximately 460,000 deaths in the U.S. during January to December 2020. And that was with lockdowns and with distancing and with like people going to the hospital and like everything else. So like the worst flu seasons we would get would be 60,000, around 60,000 deaths, I think. And this was like with everything else, we had almost 500,000 in the U.S. Even if you say that number is 2 times higher than what it should be, even if you say this number is grossly inflated 100%, that's still like 4 times as many deaths as from like the worst flu seasons. And that's with lockdowns and everything else. So